All right, so today we are talking about dragons, and not the fire-breathing, gold-hoarding kind from fantasy novels. No, we're diving into the Bible's dragons. And yes, there are dragons in the Bible, and I'm gonna show them to you. Think about the Leviathan, Nahash, Tananim. These aren't just metaphors or literary flourishes. They represent something deeply theological, something ancient, something terrifying, and completely counter to God's order. But here's the problem. Most of us don't even realize these creatures exist in Scripture. We tend to read Genesis and Revelation like they're straightforward history books. And they are history books, but they are so much more. And when we read them only as history books, we miss the cosmic war that is playing out in the background. So today, we're breaking that down. We're going to look at what these chaos creatures actually are, what they symbolize, and why the biblical authors used this imagery to describe evil, rebellion, and supernatural conflict. Because if we're reading Scripture like an ancient Israelite would have, then these dragons aren't just cool set pieces. They represent the fundamental struggle between order and disorder, between creation and uncreation, between Yahweh and everything that opposes him. I'm Laymon, a pastor and a Christian therapist, and I want to show you that the Bible is more than mere history. It's a sweeping, supernatural saga of divine war, ancient beings, and a veiled kingdom unfolding before our very eyes. Let's pierce the veil. So let's start with the basics. The Bible is obsessed with the idea of chaos versus order. If you don't understand this theme, you're going to miss a lot of what's happening in Scripture. Genesis 1, it's not just a creation story, it's a war narrative. In the beginning, the earth is tahu wabahu, formless and void. It's chaos. And so what does God do? He brings order. He separates the light from the darkness, the waters above from the waters below, and the land from the sea. So every act of creation is an act of establishing boundaries, structure, rule, governance. God isn't just making stuff, he's putting things in their proper place. And this is where it gets really interesting, because in the ancient Near East, chaos wasn't just this abstract idea. It was often personified as a monster, a cosmic force that had to be subdued in order for the world to function properly. Which brings us to the dragons. If you've ever heard of Leviathan, there's a chance that you think of it as a really big fish. Maybe a whale, maybe a giant crocodile. I heard all of those growing up. But that's not how the biblical authors saw it. Leviathan is a full-blown chaos entity. Psalm 74, 13 and 14 describes God's battle with this beast. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. Notice the wording. Heads, plural. This isn't just some normal sea creature. It's possible that Leviathan, or at least some versions of this creature, had multiple heads. And this monster doesn't just show up in Psalms. In Job 41, Leviathan is described as an indestructible, fire-breathing monster whose very existence terrifies people. In Isaiah 27:1, Leviathan is called the twisting serpent and the dragon in the sea that God will ultimately destroy. And this is important because the Bible isn't just saying Leviathan is a big, scary sea creature. It's saying that Leviathan represents something much, much bigger. It represents chaos. It represents uncreation. It represents the primeval forces that oppose God's order. And if that description sounds familiar, it should, because that brings us to the Nahash, the serpent who was in Eden. So let's talk about the Nahash. Let's talk about this serpent that shows up in the Garden of Eden. You see it in Sunday school cartoons. Adam and Eve are just kind of standing there, and there's this little garden snake with an apple in its mouth. But that's not what the text says. The word Nahash in Hebrew doesn't just mean serpent. It also carries connotations of brightness and divination, which is kind of weird, right? We have a being who is described as a serpent, but also possibly a shining one or a supernatural entity. And what does he do? He introduces chaos. Adam and Eve live in a perfect, structured, ordered world. Everything is in its place. Everything has a function. And then this entity comes in and says, actually, you can define reality on your own. You don't need to follow God's order. You can decide what's good and evil for yourselves. That's chaos. That's what chaos does. It disrupts, it corrupts, and it tears things down. The Nahash in the garden isn't just a snake. He's a representative of rebellion. He is a chaos creature masquerading as wisdom. And here's where it gets crazy. The imagery of the serpent doesn't stop in Genesis. It shows up again, but this time in Revelation. If Leviathan is the chaos monster of the sea, and the Nahash is the chaos creature of Eden, then the dragon of Revelation is the final form of that rebellion. Revelation 12:9 describes this being, and the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, there's the connection, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Did you catch that? The serpent of old. The Bible is telling you outright that this is the same entity, the same chaos force that was in Eden, the same corrupting power that introduced disorder into the world. And by the time we get to Revelation, he's not just a serpent anymore, he is a dragon. And Revelation 13 takes it a step further, describing a beast that rises from the sea, an echo of Leviathan, the chaos dragon from the Old Testament. And so this is the full circle moment. The forces of chaos first appearing as a serpent, then as sea monsters, then finally as a full-blown dragon culminate in Revelation. And what happens? God defeats them. Revelation 20 describes the dragon being cast into the lake of fire, just like Isaiah 27 promised. The serpent is finally crushed, just like Genesis 3 predicted. The chaos forces are ultimately defeated. So what's the point of all of this? Why does it matter that the Bible is filled with dragons and chaos monsters? Because this is the story of Scripture. The entire biblical narrative is about God bringing order to disorder, light to darkness, creation to uncreation. It's not just about individuals sinning. It's about cosmic forces opposing God's rule and how he overcomes them. Leviathan, Nahash, the dragon, they're all different versions of the same rebellion. And here's the kicker. The same battle is still happening today. The enemy still operates the same way. He still introduces doubt. He still asks, did God really say? He still tempts people to define reality on their own terms. But we already know the ending. The chaos dragon doesn't win. God wins. So the question is, whose side are you on? Where do you see the Leviathan showing up in your life? How does the enemy introduce doubt and chaos into your life? Let me know in the comments below. In the next video, I'm going to go back and look at the 3 separations in Genesis 1 and the divine beings that filled them. If this has been helpful to you, please consider liking the video, and if you haven't already, subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless.